So sewing they had in the Mishkan when they sewed the Yerias HaMishkan. They sewed after they wove the fabrics to make the curtains, which actually was used as a roof on top of the Mishkan, so they had to connect. There were 10 of them, 5 and 5 were connected, and then they were hooked together. So they were sewed together, according to most Rishonim, they were sewed together. And that's Teifer that was in the Mishkan. Now, as we mentioned, the Rishalmi, you mentioned last week, the Rishalmi, according to many, the Rishalmi holds it wasn't actually sewn together, they actually somehow wove it together. Because on the loom it can only go a certain amount of width, but then they would weave it together, each sheet. They would leave it open at the ends and somehow weave it, so it wasn't. That's not Teifer. So you would have to say Teifer was in the Mishkan, like the Gemara says that if something happened, if like the Nafal Darna, if like there was a hole or there was a worm got into a hole and made a hole in the urea, so they would rip it and then sew it up. Because once there's a hole, you can't just sew it. You have to rip it to make a flat piece, and then they would sew it. That was Karei al Manas Lutfar. Karei in order to sew. But in any case, according to what Shem, they actually sewed the ureas together, and sewing was in the Mishkan. What is the Malach of sewing? So technically, there's a I should go over here. He gives a little Dhamma. He says that coming from a Gemara, that if you sew 2 stitches, you're chayiv. Who shekosher roshe achut become kind. The problem was 2 stitches is really just in and out. So how does it stay? Just because you sew, we call that a stitch, but just because you sew it, how would that stay? So you would tie a little knot in one end, and you tie a little knot in the other end, and then it would stay. So before we come back to that, so it says like this: if you sew 2 stitches, so then you have to tie a knot in each end, and then you're chayiv, because then it holds. Otherwise, it doesn't hold. You're not chayiv. Doing Malach on Shabbos doesn't hold. You're not chayiv. But if you sew 3 stitches, that's considered that it holds by itself, and then you're chayiv even if you don't knot it. So that's important to remember as we go further. Now the Rishonim have a question that if you're going to have to tie the knot at the end, you're chayiv for kosher anyways. So why do you need to be chayiv for teifer? You're chayiv for kosher. So this is a question that's a very important question, and many different halachas may come out for the answer from this question. But that's teifer. Teifer is sewing 2, but you have to have it stay. So the real malacha is stay, is to 2 stitches. But in order to stay, either you got to tie it at the end, or you got to do a 3rd stitch. And that's considered that would make it remain. Now, just before we go into this point, Teifer, the Rambam says, it doesn't have to be that I sew. What is the malacha of Teifer? The malacha of Teifer is to unite 2 items to make it one. So, if I could put it together through something else, let's say I glue it together, or I, different means of connecting 2 things, so that would be considered Teifer. I sewed it, I made it together. Now, we mentioned by kosher, and it's important to remember, we'll come back to this later, that what's the difference between tying things together or sewing it together? And we're going to come back to this later, but the difference is that sewing it together makes it one. Tying it together is 2 separate things that are tied together. But sewing it together is that it becomes one unit, becomes one urea. So it's not echad, it becomes one thing. So that's sewing. So if I glue 2 things together, it's not kosher, I'm not tying, it's actually sewing, because I'm putting it together that it forms one thing. And we'll see more about this later when we get into it. But that's teifer. Teifer is sewing 2 things together. So let's first go back to the first question. So the question was, you sew 2 stitches, and you have to tie it, otherwise it doesn't remain. So you're only chayiv if you actually tie it at the end. So the Rishonim asked this kasha, and one answer the Rishonim give is that you can have a difference. In other words, kosher has to be a kesher shel kayama, we said. Right? It has to be a tie that's going to last. But a kesher she'ena shel kayama is not chayiv on Shabbos. So if you sew 2 stitches and then you tie a knot on both ends, which is not going to last, it's a kesher she'ena shel kayama, they say you're still chayiv for taifer.
Then the taifer won't last.
The rice or the bun?
So it's not going to last. I have to untie it. So the pshat is, let's say I do a slip knot or something like that. So it'll last, but I could undo it easily. So here, that's enough. The taifer is not falling apart by itself. That's enough to be chayiv. That's the raisa. So in other words, the kosher, you're not chayiv for kosher. You're just chayiv for making it that the tefillah is chayiv. That's one answer in the Rishonim. And halach l'maisa, it makes obviously a very big nafkamina. Even if I don't have a knot, which would qualify as a knot to be chayiv on Shabbos, but if I sew 2 stitches and I tied the knot at the end, both ends, I still would be chayiv. So that's one nafkamina. One could declare a shaila. Let's say you sew it on Shabbos, and on Motzei Shabbos, after Shabbos, you tied the knots on to keep the sewing. So you're not chayiv because the tefillah you did on Shabbos wasn't enough to be shakayama. It wasn't enough to be shakayama, right? So this that I tied it Motzei Shabbos. In other words, this that I tied is just a tanai. In other words, the malacha is the tefillah. The tying is just a tanai that it shouldn't come apart. So the question is, maybe a question. I sewed it on Shabbos and I tied the knots Motzei Shabbos. So am I chayiv for tefillah because I really did the whole sewing before Shabbos? And let's take this further. The Ran says another answer to this question: why? If I have to tie it, so why don't I chayiv on taifa? I should just be chayiv because of kosher. So he says a little different. That's what's the Ran. It's the Avnei learns in the mitzvah like this. That says like this. Says that let's say you tie a temporary knot. So he says really, like you were saying, if the knot is temporary, if the knot's temporary, so the sewing's also temporary. You can't have that yechayiv. He argues you can't have that yechayiv for sewing, and if you tie a temporary knot, you're going to be chayiv because if the temporary knot comes apart, so then the sewing comes apart. So you can't be chayiv for one without the other. But he says no, it's not true. It's like this. When you sew it, let's say you're sewing and they want to stop now, but you're going to continue on a later time. So I tie a temporary knot, and then later I continue sewing, and it keeps on going, and then it'll have enough. It'll be permanent. So I'm never taking apart the original stitches. I'm just pausing after 2 stitches, and then I was tying it as a temporary knot, and then I'm going to undo it and continue sewing. So even though the knot you're going to take apart, but the stitches are going to remain permanent. So the Avnei learns the mitzvah that you're chayiv for that. So, but you still see something interesting because you could still argue, well, the sewing is not permanent yet. When I continue sewing, it'll become permanent. At this point, I only did 2, and it's not going to stay, right?
Yeah, but your thought is to make it permanent.
My thought is to make it permanent. But I didn't make it permanent yet, maybe. And only when I finished the malacha I should be chayiv. And that I did on Sunday. I finished sewing it on Sunday. So maybe I'm not chayiv. But with falls the chayiv, because why? Because there's no difference. The sewing itself, the malacha of sewing itself, there's no difference. It's just a side thing that we want to make sure it doesn't fall apart. It's not like a kesher Scheiner shal kayom. I didn't do malacha. I didn't do the kshira that the Torah says. The tefillah I did the exact taifa that the Torah said is chayiv malacha. It's just like a side thing that I have to make sure that doesn't fall apart. So it seems as even if I make a temporary knot, since right now it's not falling apart, and eventually I'm going to keep on sewing it, so I'm going to be chayiv. So one could declare if I sew on Shabbos and I tie it Motzei Shabbos, I'm never taking apart these tefillas, and I did the malacha what I was supposed to be doing. Maybe that's enough. I'm just bringing up the point. But this is the question: like, how far do you take this vart that they're saying that as long as you tie temporary tying, but the sewing is permanent, that's enough, because you don't plan on taking apart the sewing. So you see from there a little bit that the sewing is the ikar malacha, and the tying it is just like just to make sure that it doesn't come apart. But it's not the real. The real malacha is when you're sewing it.
Is a kosher kol considered a temporary knot?
What?
Like your lulav.
Oh, we're going to talk about that. It's very negaya halacha. That's more by knots, but we're going to talk about it if it comes up. Yeah.
That's what we just Shabbos for Shabbos, for 24 hours.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about this, but what we're talking about now is a type of knot that can't last, not a type of sewing that can't last. In other words, when I sew 2 stitches and I don't tie it at the ends, even if I plan on leaving it there forever, but since it's a type of thing that won't last, so it's not a malacha. If I tie it to the ends, even if I plan on taking it apart, that's a different question that we're going to discuss. If I do something that I'm going to take apart, but if I do something that can't last, that can't hold at all, so that maybe is not considered taifa. That seems to be clear. If I do 2 stitches, I didn't do enough of a malacha to be considered a taifa.
3 without knot
Is taifa.
because why? Because the middle one is going to last. The middle one tight
Yeah, it
first.
seems. Yeah, that's going to last. Yeah, it's not going to fall apart by itself. You could pull it apart, but it'll stay. That's considered a malacha. That's kaim. Yeah. So if I do such a kind of thing, it's going to be chayiv. So let's say you put a glue that's not going to last for so long. I mean, you have to know if that's like 3 stitches or 2 stitches. It's not something which is so easy to compare to other types of attaching. How firm does it have to be? It'll be chayiv. It's going to come apart. It'll come apart by itself. Could be an chayiv. It's something which you have to have time. It's going to fall apart. Maybe that's not good enough.
And
that's a question.
It seems the theme, though, is when something is being bound, 2 objects be made into one, really.
Yeah.
Right. So if you and that's where the weaving is different, because it's still 2 separate objects.
Right. And we're going to come to that. Why? Yes. This taifa means it becomes one. Right.
We're
going to get
really
more into
tight.
that.
Is that
That's kosher. Let's talk about kosher. That's tying.
Right.
It's 2 separate things. You tie it together and you take it apart.
Right.
But taifa is something which you
Right.
sew, which you consider to try. You're making it one thing. There is a big question there's a big question on this, that we have another concept where you attach 2 things to sew in that you chayiv besides Shabbos, and that's klayim, right? If you sew together wool with linen, you chayiv. It's a famous question, and the Rambam says there if you do shtei tekifos, you chayiv. If you do 2 stitches, you chayiv, even though you don't tie it together. It seems even if you don't tie it together, it's still considered a klayim, the chayiv for Shabbos. So you see that what you really see from here is what we're saying. What you really see from here is that 2 stitches is really enough to be considered as sewn together. For Shabbos, there's like this clause that it has to be a malacha that's malachas machshavas, that's something that's going to remain. So therefore, if you don't tie it on the ends, it's not called malachas machshavas. But really, it's called that it was sewed together when you have 2 stitches, even if you don't tie. So the etzem malacha is tying 2 stitches. You see, for klayim, the Rambam seems to say a chayiv when you attach the sem and the piston together, even though you don't tie it at the ends. There are other answers, but that's quite what you see. You could take out from this. Now, there's we mentioned that the Rambam says that it doesn't have to be sewing if you connect 2 things together anyway, through glue or through other avenues, you're also going to be chayiv for taifa. So what's interesting is the Bi Halacha brings the Rambam that he says if you glue 2 pieces of wood together, you're chayiv. If you glue 2 pieces of wood together, that's also considered taifa, sewing. So the question is, why is that taifa? Why is that not boina? I built 2 woods together and I attached it. That's boina. What's taifa and what's boina? So many would say, and this would be like the first thought would be, well, it depends what material you're talking about. If you're talking about a material, a solid material, so then that's building. I take two blocks and I attach it together, that's building. But if you're talking about cloth material, so that's not building, that's
Tied for bina, but just by moving the dirt, sand in your floor.
a floor is a solid binyan.
But not when they had sandy floors, right?
Yeah, the floor is a solid binyan, and I'm fixing up a hole in the floor, so I'm taking something which is solid. Yeah, the dirt I'm putting in may be soft, but I'm stuffing up a hole. And if I take cloth material and I stuff it into a hole and I make it equal, that's also bina.
Velcro's not an issue, is it?
Oh, we'll talk about Velcro. We'll get to that. Yeah. We'll talk about that.
So the example of two pieces of wood, why is that not bone? It's not cloth.
No, so that's what I'm saying. So you would say really that two pieces of wood, you would say is bina, but the Malachas seems to say that's considered also teifer. But he asked the question.
So it is both. I'm sorry.
So that's the question. Like, why does he say it's teifer? It's in Fursh Rambam that if you put two pieces of wood together, the Rosh Rambam is hatokei eitz be'eitz bein shetakum misvah. Whether you use a nail or you stick the wood into the other wood, that's bina. Now there's an interesting Makevas HaMishnah, which is very negeya, which is a chiddush.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So a nail of two pieces of wood, that's bone. Glue two pieces of wood.
So why should that be different? That's the question.
Right.
Yeah. So it's an interesting Makevas HaMishnah that wants to say a chiddush that teifer is only if you attach two things via a third thing. So I take the two cloths and I sew it together with a thread. So I'm taking a thread and I'm sewing together. That makes a teifer. But if I just attach it together without another vehicle, let's say I take two pieces of metal, I melt it together. I have a way of attaching it together without using a third thing. So that would not be considered teifer. Teifer is only when you take a third thing. It's a chiddush, and it seems the poskim don't go with this lahalacha. But that's what he seems to be saying, that teifer is only when I take something else and I sew it. But if I don't have a third thing that I'm using, that's not b'chlal teifer.
And in his case of the nail.
So the nail chayra should be
also
teifer possibly. The sticking one wood into another wood would be bina.
So but two pieces of paper stapled
It's the third object.
would be teifer?
That's teifer.
What?
Two pieces of paper and then staple them together is teifer?
Oh, so chayra would be teifer, yeah. Sew them together with a metal thing. Yeah, it's teifer.
With regular tefir, the third item is similar to the other two items because they're both materials.
Yeah, they don't make a difference in that.
It
Yeah.
doesn't make
Yeah.
So glue has nothing to do
So
with
glue,
one.
yeah.
That doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's a shikol chiddush. There's a third chiluk which doesn't help for the bia halacha, but this is also very relevant for halacha. That it seems, we'll come back to this later, that when you chayav on teifer and some, these two malachas go together, just like kosher and matzah go together, tying and untying go together. So too teifer and korea goes together. You rip. So something which could be ripped, has a din of korea. Something which can't be ripped, has a din of teifer. You sew it, and really teifer, what they used to, they would rip it by the seams even. That's also called ripping. Ripping doesn't mean, the real ripping is not that you take a cloth and you rip it in half. The ripping is they actually rip it by its seams. That's ripping. So teifer, even though we're saying you're taking two things and making it one, but it has the malach of ripping afterwards, that you can rip it apart and separate it. That's sort of something.
Bathroom tissue? Like bathroom tissue?
Well, that's really one thing. I'm saying you take two things and you tie it together and you sew it together and you rip it apart. So that's something which teifer has to be something which could have korea, which could be separated.
The Mishkan was not on the seam, right? The example of the Mishkan was something, a piece of material tore somewhere in the middle.
Right,
and
right, and they ripped it in the middle. So that was not on the seam. So they want to say, this is also Makevas HaMishnah wants to say that there it's also was different materials that were woven together. But you're not taking a solid and ripping it in half. If I take a piece of paper, or paper maybe, I take something solid thing and I rip it in half, so it says that's not really korea. Korea is things which were once separate that were put together somehow, and now I'm separating it. So the Mishkan also was like that. What? Where's the Baltag? Yeah, Baltag says that.
So Korea's
Right.
Yom Suf isn't correct. No, I mean the word Korea is used there.
The waters are also separate. You have a lot of droplets of water. You just gather together. It's a chiddush. These are all chidushim. But the simple way of understanding is that something solid doesn't have the malacha of teifer. That goes on the binyan. Something that's cloth would be considered a teifer if you sew together, and who in Korea doesn't have. If I break something solid, even two pieces of wood that were glued together, if I break them apart, that's soiser, which sometimes also it's soiser. And if I rip a cloth together, that is Korea. But I have to mention that soiser by cloth could also be soiser. If you have a kli or something, if you have something that was made into a bag or something which is a utensil that's being used, even though it's a cloth one, if you break it, it could be soiser because you're breaking something. So we'll have to discuss that when we get to soiser. Soiser doesn't have to be solid. It means you're breaking something that's built. And I think many will learn over here also by boina. Boina is really attaching something to a ground. The real boina is really building really has its conditions also. The real building is really something that's connected to the ground. So if I were to take
during the process of building, or intended to be connected to the ground.
No, I'm building a house. Let's say I'm building something.
You could technically build something that's not attached to the ground and then put it in the ground.
Right. So
then, how does that affect its dim?
Chavis. We talk about binyan.
So you're making a chavis is a whole machlokes if yesh binyan b'kelim or ein binyan b'kelim. So it's not so simple that something go building and maybe it'll go on the makah b'patish. It's not so simple if you build something that's not considered mechubel kaka. Oil is not considered mechubel kaka, but it has a din of oil. There's different guidelines to binyan. So even if I make a cloth thing, I want to make a wall for my sukkah. I had a cloth, canvas. So you can say it's not binyan, it's binyan. I build a cloth. I'm building something which is a structure that's attached to the ground. That's considered a binyan. But Korea and Teifer is not really. You're not really looking at the bigger project. You're looking at just this cloth itself. I think that's where the real chiluk is. So binyan, you're looking at the project. I'm building something. I'm being born to something. So it's on the chubul karka. So I'm making. If I have a ground and I fill up a hole, I'm making a smooth ground. So I'm building the ground. If it's a wall, I build a hole. So I'm making a cubby in the wall. All these things in the Gemara are things where it's a part of a project. It's a binyan. You're in construction. But if I just take two cloths and I sew it together, even as long as there's a purpose for it and there's a tikkun for it, even if this cloth doesn't have a shem kli and there's nothing on it, I'm still chayav for teifer. So teifer more looks at the material that I'm using, and if I put it together, that's teifer. I don't have to look at the project that I'm doing. Binyan, I'm really looking at the project. I think this is a big chiluk, but we'll get to that more when we learn the Malachas binyan. But for practical purposes, to be halacha saying a chiddush that putting two pieces of wood could be teifer, and it could be he's going in a case where you wouldn't be chayav for binyan. But the other poskim are saying it has to be cloth-like material, which it could be kareya, it's not shvir, not breaking. And these things have the malacha of teifer. You see, the halacha brings a raya actually from a Gemara, which you mentioned, the Gemara of Chavis. The Gemara says if a person makes a Chavis, he's chayav 11 chatasin. He does 11 averos by weaving a barrel. And one of them is teifer at the top, when he sews the top. He sort of sews it, he chayte lepume chayav, as the Gemara says, it's chayav 13. He sews the top, and you would actually use the reeds to sew. So that's teifer. He says, you see, there's teifer on wood. But you could say that that's on a softer wood. It's like a reed, which, in the old days, that's how they made these things. With, okay, so that's a question how you quantify the malach and in what cases it's going. But Akapanim, that's the portion that's going on something which is soft, and that's Taifa is putting it together. Now, so let's see some practical cases on this, which is very relevant. Okay, maybe there's one issue we should discuss first, which is very relevant. It's temporary. So what's called malacha that's not niskayim, something which is not going to last. So we said by kosher, if you tie a knot and you plan on opening it that day, as long as it's not a kesher that's kesher shaluman that we spoke about that the Rama Moses asking. But if you plan on opening it, it's not shakayama, you're not chayiv. What's the halacha with tefillah? If you sew something and it's plan on opening, and this is very, very relevant in many, many cases in halacha. But just in the Shulchan Aruch itself, we have actually a lot of steers in this issue. So let's see. First, we have by untying, which we discussed last week in Shin Zayin. It says like this: that we said that the shirts were sewn together by the neck, and if you want to get your head in, you had to cut the sewing. So we spoke about this maybe it's makabah patish, you're finishing off the shirt, but there's also untying. That's what we call untying. Now, really, it's not untying. Really, it's sewn. So it would be a malacha of kareh, of ripping, and sewing and ripping goes together. So it says over there that if it's done, the Ramah says, leaving out the problem of makabah patish, but if it's done only for temporary, it's only done until, or if it was done by the cleaners, we said, the cleaners would sew it shut. I guess it kept the shirt more stiff or straight. So then you would cut it, you would rip it open with your knife or something, and take off the stitches. So since it was only done for temporary, till you took it home and put it on, so then it's not a malacha d'oraisa for sure. It's a temporary, and you're ripping it, so that's mutter. This is what it says here. You're allowed to cut it. It's made to cut. So that was a question if it's done, how many days it's done, what's called temporary. But you see here that something which is temporary sewed together, you could undo. That's what Ramah says. And then he says, and therefore you could cut also the zugsham and nolam atfurim yachad. They would sew the shoes together so they shouldn't get mismatched, I guess. You sew them together, and then when you got it, you cut it.
But the shirts that are sewn together from the laundry,
right?
If somebody brought in, 4 or 5 shirts, even if the person says, I'm going to take that shirt, I'm going to wear one today, the other shirts are not going to be worn for days and days.
Right, that's the issue. Is it called that it's a cash? Is that called shalkayam?
The dry sew will never be, though, right?
What?
The dry sew will never be, because it's not almanas liftor. The kareya of this.
So this we'll have to discuss by kareya if you need almanas liftor or not, or it's enough that it's a tikkun in itself. This is a big question. We'll have to discuss if that's the right. So there are many that say it's not the right because it has to be almanas to sew, but there are those that say anything which is a tikkun in essence in itself, kareya b'chamasa, right? The Gemara says you rip to get rid of your anger, is a tikkun. So we'll discuss that when we get to the malacha of ripping. That's a very valid point.
Sorry, I just need this to reviewed. So then this sewing of the shoes together and you're ripping.
Yeah, so the Ramah says like this. So if you sew it together and you rip it, so
you're chayiv?
So this is what we get. So this is Lashon Ramah. So Ramah brings 2 days. It says like this. He says, Avagav, he says, Osir. He says you're not allowed to not take or lachter zug shalmanolim hatfurim yachad, they're sew together. Kader shumim noisim. Avagav that tefira in shalkayama. It's not shalkayama because you can't wear your shoes when they're sewn together. So it's not meant to stay like that. Still, why the ein chiluk betfira? By sewing, there's no difference between shakayama and shakayama. There you go. The first sheet here, the Ramah says, you can't untie your shoes. You can't cut the sewing of the shoes together because there's no in tying. If it's not shakayama, you're allowed to untie. But in sewing, no deal. You can't. There's no difference if it's permanent or temporary.
You can't do it. So okay, go ahead.
One second. V'yesh matirin betfira. Ramah brings another shiva. No, you're allowed to do it betfira sheina shakayama. So those say that you're allowed to do it, you're allowed to untie.
Because you're going to have tsar, you won't be able to wear your shoes.
For the tsar, I want to know if it's a malacha. Tsar is not mati, it's do malacha on Shabbos. First we need to know, is there an isser undoing and ripping the sewn thing if it's for temporary.
So this is Ramah speaking on both sides?
Yeah, he brings a yesha, he brings two shittas.
Does he say halacha l'maisa?
Yeah, he says v'yesh matuvim mishan shel kayana. No, he doesn't say halacha l'maisa. He just says ve'ein lahati b'fnei ha'ma'aretz. This we mentioned last week. So he says there's two shittas. If you're allowed to undo the tying,
right,
two shittas, and he ends off ve'ein lahati b'fnei ha'ma'aretz, that you shouldn't, even though those that are matter, it seems, say you shouldn't do it in front of an Amoritz. And that's what it seems that Achronim Paskin halacha l'maisa.
According to this opinion, like you couldn't open up a brand new shirt, let's say that has pins.
Oh, we're going to talk about pins. That's a valid
So
question. We're going to get to all this. Yeah.
We have a similar case that I just thought about. You know, if you buy, it's true, this happens today. You buy a new pillow, you get like one of these long tags that are attached to it that says, please do not remove until after you buy it. And this thing, it's just like hits you in the neck and bugs you, and you want to like
sewn on.
It's sewn on.
You want to rip it off.
Right, and it's meant to prove that it's brand new.
Right.
So in a situation like this, you could either be tearing it or you could be removing it through the thread.
So that's meant to stay forever? No, it's meant to take off.
It's meant to take off.
It's meant to take off because they say do not remove it until after you won't.
But it is sewn on.
It's sewn on, but if it's meant forever, then that's a malacha deraisa. If it's meant temporary, then it would be right. That would be a good comparison. Yeah.
So you could do it as long as you don't have, and then it's
right. So you have machlokes here, and the Ramah seems to be matir as long as you don't do it b'fnei ha'ma'aretz. You could rip it. Now we'll get to this b'fnei ha'ma'aretz business when that applies, and we'll also get to the halacha l'maisa. So he seems to say you could do it. Ramah seems to say, and the poskim learn that Ramah's coming out like the yesh matirim, and especially if there's a tzorich,
yeah, so you have to close your eyes before I do it.
It has to be a tzorich for Shabbos. You can rely on this. There's a tzorich for Shabbos. You know, you want to wear your shoes on Shabbos. It's a tzorich good for Shabbos. You need it. So if it's tzorich for Shabbos, so you could rely on this opinion and cut your shoes as long as it's not fellow amart. Okay, that's halacha. That's in Shin Yud Zayin. Now in Shin Mem, we have another halacha which doesn't seem to go like this. It says like this. We'll come back to that in a minute. But it says here, halacha Zayin, that oisam shemahadkin habegodim. So they used to have a you wanted to tighten your sleeves so it shouldn't hang like this. So you crunch up and make it nice and geschmack and tight. So you had a string in there and you pulled it and it crunched it together.
You have it with your hoods.
Yeah, with the hoods. They have it with the hoods. That's right. You pull it and it gets tight. So that's okay. Different hoods are made different ways, but here it's sewn in. It's like a thread that's sewn, and you pull it, so you're tightening the thing. So the Mechaber says it's also to pull that thread to tighten the thing, unless. Okay, we're going to get back to this unless also, but the unless it's made like you have today, especially you have with like the shoes, you have like little metal rings around it, and it's thicker holes. It's big nekavim. Says Lashon, in the kavim rechavim k'tzas, they're wider holes. Musukanim b'tvir be'igul, and it's sewn around the holes. We have a metal around the holes, but it's like a ring sewn around the holes, so that doesn't look like teifer anymore. So then you could pull it to tighten it. Why? Because you're only doing it till you finish wearing it, and when you're unfinished wearing it, you let it go looser and you take it off.
Where's the two things connecting into one? It's only one thing making it tighter. Like we said, always like you have two pieces of material. You take a thread and you connect it.
This is actually a very good question. Here you have a concept of teifer without attaching two separate things. You're just scrunching the one thing together. And still it's called teifer. And it could be malacha deraisa even. You see, if let's say I sew at the end of I want to sew a stitch around just for a design at the end of my thing, and I sew it on. Is that a malacha of teifer? So, I'm talking about this.
What? When you pull the cord,
pull it all up, yeah. But that's made like this. That is rechavim k'tzas. That's made with holes, clear, recognizable holes, and that's the case with Mechaber would say it's mutter, right? But this is a good question. The teifer. If I just sew, let's say I sew a design embroidery, is that teifer or is that kosher? The poskim say that's also teifer. You're right. Like the Shulchan Harav, it's questionable because it's one thing. But here, I have to put two things together. Here, I'm putting the thread together with the even just putting the thread together with the cloth that could be as taifa.
There is I can't remember the name. There's a temporary stitching that tailors use. Basting. I thought it looked like turkeys.
Yeah,
but anyway,
same word.
They do a temporary stitch.
Yeah, you have it. You know, when you buy your suit, when you buy your pocket, your suit and pockets, you can take it off. Right. That will be similar also. Sometimes not so easy to get off, but that will be a case where it's temporary and you want to cut it. So let's get back. So the Mechaber here says to tighten it. I don't know exactly how it stays tightened, but to tighten it, that's considered maybe you'd make a small temporary knot at the end. But when you tighten it, that's a malacha, unless it has wide things. Now the issue here is it's temporary, and the Ramah doesn't say anything. The Ramah doesn't say that yesh matirin, not in front of an Amorit. He doesn't say that over here. It leaves it that it's usher. So normally the Ramah would argue. So it sounds like almost as if he agrees. So there's a big problem. If a temporary sewing is mutter, that's why you're allowed to untie it, undo it. So why over here? This is definitely temporary. He can't get it. He's not going to be able to take it off without. So what's interesting to note is the Shulchan Harav says that even the ones that are thicker, which he says is mutter with the thicker holes, if he plans on tightening it forever, it could be a zasa, because that could be sewing. If you tighten it and you want to leave it there forever, that would be a problem. But if you're doing a temporary here, and still it's usher if it looks like sewing. So this is a kasha, and all the achronim deal with this kasha. So there are many who have an opinion to be mechalek between these two cases, and they say that no, the Ramah agrees that temporary sewing is usher to sew. Sewing is usher even temporary, but to undo it is mutter. This is the Ramah was matter yesh matirim is only to be korea. If it's a temporary sewing and I rip it open, then I'm not doing a malacha. So there's a difference between usually we're not mechalek between toifer and korea. One is undoing the other. But here we're saying that toifer would be usher even if it's temporary. And you can't sew a temporary sew. But to undo it, that would be mutter. This is a stricter opinion. And it has a lot of different nafkaminas halachas, we'll see in a moment. To attach something temporary according to this would be usher. So that's how they want to answer the stira here in the Ramah. That's one opinion. Shlomo Zalman in the Shmir Shabbos Gilchasei says it doesn't hold like this. He says there's no chiluk between taifa and kosher, and he says that no, temporary is also mutter, and really the Ramah would argue on this case also. Really the Ramah would argue on this case and would hold that you're allowed to tighten your sleeve if it's only for temporary purposes. I will see later. Maybe there's another chiluk we'll get to, but he says that maybe Taka would be. Ramah really could have argued, he just didn't. He already said before, so he didn't have to say it over here. You find such things, so it could be it will be mutter. My nafkamina, practically. You want to put a bandage on. Okay, you want to tape it. Tape is taifa. Taping is also taifa. Okay, so you have a wound. Yeah, we talk about band-aids also. We talk about band-aids. Let's say I put a
pressure bandage.
Yeah, a real bandage. I have a real wound, and I put a real bandage on, and I tape it on with tape, and it's going to stay there for 7-8 days, 10 days. It's going to stay for a while until I go back and take it apart. So it's not permanent, because I'm going to undo it. But it's taifer, so it's going to stay for a while. But it's not going to stay forever. So is that a issa deraisa or issa drabanan? Stay for more than 7 days. If you stay for more than 24 hours, it might be a drabanan. By kosher, it's drabanan to stay for more. But if it's a drabanan, I could ask a guy to do it. It could be for certain chaylas, it would be mutter, But if it's a deraisa, you're finished. So here I'm tying it on, I'm taping it on. Is that a malacha? So Shlomo Zalman Nemzan that a temporary thing is mutter. Just like the Ramah is matter to untie, he's also matter to tie. That will be a one big nafkamina. we said we're going to talk about the napkins. So you have the question with diapers and things like that, where you attach it as a tape, and then you're going to detach it later. With soil, you're going to now they have all kinds of things, Velcro and whatever, but you tie it temporarily, and then you want to undo it. You want to undo it. So that's a temporary tape. So is that a malacha or is it not a malacha? So according to the Ramah,
putting it on would be...
Putting it on, according to the sheets that say putting it on you can't do it, because it's temporary you can't do it. But once it's on you could undo it, because it was temporarily done, you would be able to undo it. So here there's more reason to say that it's mutter, as we'll see. But
what do we say about Velcro?
we're going to get to Velcro. Up to Velcro yet. We have time to get to everything today. We're going to get to Velcro. But here is another svara to say it's mutter, and that's the svara of derech tashmishay. In other words, we all know you're not allowed to make just an example we have. We all know you're not allowed to make oil. You're not allowed to make a tent on Shabbos, right? But if you have a sukkah with a roof that opens and closes, or you have a stroller that opens and closes, so it's mutter. It's just a door. It's a door that opens and closes. So I'm not making an oil. I'm just using it the way it's used. It opens and closes. There's such a concept of derech tashmishay. So you have things which open and close together. You know, we'll talk about buttons in a minute. They button, open, and close it. We'll get to that.
Umbrella is the same thing?
No. Umbrella's not the same thing, because it's not attached to anything. It's a freestanding thing. You open it when it's closed. It has no purpose. But if it's attached to a stroller, if it's built into the stroller, so you open and close it, it's part of the clear. It's a door of the clear of the stroller. Instead, yeah. So here also, if you have the diaper is meant to close and open. That's how you use it. You open and close it. So some disagree over here the application of this svara, but there is a svara here to say that it's not even temporary. It's better than temporary. It's the way you use it. You open and close it. So the oilam was always noeg l'kula to close the diapers and open them. But you have it in all areas. You have these kind of things today, where things that stick open, stick close, you take it on and off, where you'll have this shiloh. There's a bigger issue when you finish using the diaper and you close it, because you want it to be nice and packaged closed, and you don't plan on opening it again.
Right.
You don't plan on opening it again. So that is called shel kayama. You're leaving it, you're sewing it for good, and you're leaving it there.
You said something that to me is a bombshell. I don't understand this. You're saying that if you had an umbrella attached to a stroller, it was fixed to the stroller, that'd be mutter?
I'm not saying like the hoods of the stroller.
Could you open it?
It's not a separate thing. It's like the hood of the stroller. It's the way the stroller is used.
But what if you had an umbrella that was mamish attached to the stroller?
Okay, I don't know if maybe it's a separate thing that's just stuck in. I have to know how it works. But if you have
if it was permanently attached with
you have an umbrella. You have an umbrella on the patio. It's attached to the table or it's stuck into the hole.
Can you open it?
According to many places, you can open it.
You can open it. That's the same as opening up an umbrella.
Yeah, so we have to wait till we get to oil to see if it's the same or different.
Don't go away.
So there is, and maybe for another time.
Continues.
Maybe for another time, but there is an umbrella that you can wear on your head.
No.
Yes, there is. I've seen it.
Maybe there is, but I'm not saying you can wear it.
Oh.
You're telling me what the case is. I'm thinking,
okay.
Okay, we'll see. We have to get to it. We have to get to oil.
I'd like to argue that one out, although.
So, but the concept exists as something which is just a door to open and close. Say also, the question is closing it permanently, leaving it on the thing. So they bring a raya actually from you asking me the lulav, the case of the lulav. The Gemara is mavur that a lulav is considered a kesher shel kayama. You tie it onto the lulav, it's called a kesher shel kayama. The Gemara is mavur like that. Now I don't need it forever. I only need it for sukkahs. After sukkahs, it stays on top of my thing until Pesach or.
Right.
Well, who knows when? Yeah. So, is that called a kesher shel kayama? You're tying it and then you're leaving it. We spoke about this when we tie the garbages, right? You tie the garbages and then you throw it out. So, is that kayama? I only need it for a day, but it's going to remain like that until who knows when.
They don't always act so permanent.
So they bring a raya from the lulav case that since even though I only need it for a short amount of time, but since it stays like that, that's maybe considered a kesher shel kayama. Others disagree. Others say that the whole purpose of this is just a temporary purpose to get it into the garbage. So it's not kayam. I don't care about it afterwards. I don't care how long it stays. I'm just doing it for temporary. The fact that nobody bothers to open it up afterwards and nobody cares is still considered temporary. So that's a question.
That's the same discussion we had with regard to garbage bags.
Yeah, garbage bags, same thing, right. So, Akoponim, that's a question. So this comes up, a temporary attachment. So now you're going to ask me, fine, let's say we go like the Matirim, like Rav Shem Zalman's Mutter, but it says you can't do it in front of an Amoritz. So Moshe says you can't do it in front of an Amoritz. You have to make sure that there's nobody looking. I mean, I don't know who's Amoritz today. He's not Amoritz.
Can you say that it's someone's an Amoritz if they just don't understand that particular action?
Yeah,
it could be a Talmud Chacham who just didn't learn that this one.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. So so it's hard. So there are many that say that doesn't apply in such a case. Such a case which is obvious to anyone who's looking that it's a temporary thing. As Chazal says, something which is very obvious. It's not a permanent type of adhesive. It's just tie and untie. So people won't mistake it for a permanent tying. So in other words, the only time the Ramah says you shouldn't do it in front of Amoritz is something which people will mistaken, and they'll think that you could, undo a permanent sewing also. It's sewn together. It looks very professionally sewn, and I'm ripping it. People won't make the difference. But something which is the type of thing. So it's not sewn together with a thread which could last forever. It's a tape which is used to open and close. So such a kind of thing would matter even b'fnei Amoritz, because people won't get confused in such a kind of concept. Time over here. We'll get an overtime here. What I would like to get into, see if we could just get started with it, as everybody's asking Velcro and everything else, but where the discussion starts in Malachas, safety pins. You want to pin something together. That Malacha of Taifer of sewing. So there's a Korban Asano that asks the question. There's a Korban Asano back in the Gemara. He asks the question. He doesn't understand why people use a pin to hold things together. It's a Malacha D'Oraisa of Taifer. Now just to understand where he's coming from, maybe if you stitch 2 stitches, it's not going to hold. That's if you have a thread. But if you have a pin, it stays. Especially a safety pin, which clips together. They didn't have safety pins nowadays, but even a pin, it holds. Especially if you do 3, if it goes in and out and in 3 times, so that would be a Malacha D'Oraisa. 2 times, maybe it will stay, maybe it won't stay. One could debate whether that's considered a real Malacha. But definitely we're not matter 2 stitches l'chatchila. And everybody goes ahead and pins stuff onto the, whole thing's shut with a pin. And he asked the question, how possibly could it be mutter? So, and going with that Korban Asano, believe it or not, there's a Mishabur over here. The Mishabur says, Val Kain, Oisim ha'anoshim shetoichmen ha'krais im ha'beged b'machat. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but they attach 2 things attach something onto the clothing with a pin. V'shtei tekifas in and out, lav shaper avdi. They're not doing right. And if they stick it in and out and in, chayiv afilu b'li kesher. You're chayiv.
It's never permanent, though.
Yeah, not permanent, for sure not.
Yeah. So chayiv is not permanent. So there's a question. This is an excellent question, and the chayiv is still in the Mishabur himself, because the Mishabur himself says that a pin is mutter. The Mishabur himself says in 2 places. He says that if one pins on, when it talks about carrying out on Shabbos, it's a Gemara that you're not allowed to carry out. Isha could go out with a pin if it's wearing. You're not carrying out on Rosh Hashanah. So you're allowed to wear things to carry it out. So you pin on a jewelry on you, so you're wearing it. So you're not chayiv haitzah. But the question is, you might take it off and show it to someone that carries it. But there it says clearly that if you pin it, you're allowed to take it off and on. And that's a pin. And the Shabbat says it's mutter, which seems to say it's mutter. That's one case. There's another Mishabur says mutter. Mishabur in 2 places says that a pin is mutter. So some want to say that the difference would be if it's permanent or temporary. It's not so much from the Mishabur, it's a question. But in other words, let's say I have my hem came down, so I pin it. I stick a pin in there. The hem came down. I want to pin it. I can't sew it, so I'll pin it up for now until after Shabbos. So that's something which is, even though I'm only putting till after Shabbos while I'll sew it, but that's something which is more permanent type of thing. But if I'm just pinning on a jewelry onto my outfit, so that's made to take off and come on and off, so that we don't view as a permanent type of sewing, and maybe that would be mutter. That's the way you could say in the Mishabura. But nonetheless, there is a Tshuvas from Moshe Feinstein and the Igros Moshe. There's also a Chazon Ish. They take the same view, and he's very strong. I just when we read the Lashon Chazon Ish, he takes such a strong Scheiner on this. He says like this. He brings the Korban Nesanel. He says, Divrei Korban Nesanel Temuhim, the Temuah. HaToichav Matel Lahadek L'Fisha is like putting a hook on. The Ein Bo Zeh Shemesh Shel Tfira Klal. It has nothing to do with sewing whatsoever. And he brings to Beis Yosef that you could put it on to the different case. Mahatkan Mafteach HaCholok. Simple type of case. And then he says also Korban Nesanel himself was made that everybody did heter. Ubizmanei, there were go'inim, adirim, oimdim, the parrots, and everybody was yirachet in his days. And he says everybody was matter, so you see it was mutter. He says, Korban Nesanel, loimoli pivla, and he didn't even say it's osir, he just asked the question. He says it has to be that it's mutter. So he says it's mutter, and Moshe also says it's mutter, and he says the reason is that's not sewing, that's a button. If I put two things, if I put my button on, so you say I sewed it because it's going to stay. That's mutter. So he says that's something which is made. That's how Moshe explains it. Where sewing, we said, is when you're making two things into one. I'm sewing it together. Now I consider it one. But these things I don't consider this one. I consider it two. They're buttoned together, and then I open it later when I want to get out. So something which I don't view as one, it's not sewed together to view as one. That's not b'chlal the malach of teifer. That might be kosher, and it's not a kesher shakayama. It's not even a kesher, so there wouldn't be a problem. So that's what Moshe says. So something which is teifer is when I'm sewing it together to make it one thing. Even though I let's say the shoes I sew together, I don't want it one. I want to eventually undo it. But it's sewn in a way that it's temporarily one. So that's a malach of sewing is to make it one object.
It's almost like a lock in the door.
Yeah, it's almost like a lock on the door. Right. Yeah.
I would
So,
assume that there's something about the puncturing itself that is a problem. I mean, the difference in a button is like I'm puncturing the cloth, which is the beginning.
Yeah, but it's finding a space, really.
Yeah, well, okay. So you want to know if I'm making a hole is a problem.
Yeah. The question is, are you really making a hole?
Correct.
Just finding a space.
It's a good question. Well, let's just assume for now. It's a good question. Assume for now I'm just putting it in between the places. But he wants to know about making a hole. If that would be, it could be it's you want to have some malacha kareya. It's a good question. But it was just a little overtime. I just want to end with this: that Moshe holds that that pinning together is just a form of buttoning, and that's the answer for Velcro. All these things which are not made to hold the two things together as to make it one. It's just take it off and on. So that's considered, that's not a malach of teifer. It doesn't even get included in the malach of teifer. Therefore, pinning together is not a malach. I would venture to say, lefi zeh, one could question whether it would be mutter, again with the hem, where you want to hold it together with that is that like buttoning or is that like sewing? Eventually I'm going to sew it. Now I'm just sticking the pin in. A lot of poskim seem to be matter but maybe according to the svara there would be room to be machmal like the Mishavura, that would be a svara, because it's only when it's like a button, just putting it on, taking it off, but something which is meant to be stayed together permanently like that, I'm just doing a temporary sewing with a piece of metal.
So could I use a piece of tape for that?
Tape would be the same thing, same issue.
It's okay.
No, it's the same question.
It's definitely not permanent.
It's not permanent, it's temporary.
You have in your mind, you're going to take it apart.
Right, so that's totally in the Ramah. That's totally in the Ramah whether you're allowed to do a temporary taping. B'fnei Amoritz, Shalai B'fnei Amoritz, maybe it's Motanan. That's totally that Shiloh, but the pin is less than that. The pin is like buttoning, which Ramesh is saying and the Chazon Ish is saying that it's 100% mutter.
What about pinning on a board? You're going to pin a piece of paper on a board temporarily, so you don't forget.
Might be biting it.
Might be biting it, yeah. It's biting it.
I'm putting magnet on a piece of paper.
Yeah, we're talking about buying the magnet. It's not tight. That's definitely like a bottle.
Right.